You wrote the thing about Ric Flair earlier this week, and do you think you were a little hard on his wrestling? Or
no, I think I was really precise.
Okay.
A lot of people think that Flair was you know what, he was a really good mechanic in the ring. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Rick. Worked the leg, he could work the leg. I mean, he worked it beautifully all the time. But his psychology, he never had an ounce of psychology, Ric Flair. I never saw any psychology in any of my matches that I ever had with him or anyone else's matches with him. He was a guy that really was a 3 dressed up as a 9. I think I was hit this nail right on the head, and the only way you can know that is to have worked with him or to have, the only way is really is to know it is to have worked with him and or been in the business. And, you know, I think most of the people that I respected in the business never had a lot of respect for Ric Flair as a real worker, as a great worker. He was a guy that could do all the mechanical wrestling, but he never had a clue what he was doing from the time the bell rang to the time the bell ended, or rang the end of the match.
Because I've got to say, you know, when most of the wrestlers that I've talked to, I mean, of the current wrestlers, I mean, the 3 names they bring up as who they think the best are you, Shawn Michaels, and Ric Flair. Some of the older wrestlers, you know, you'll hear Terry Funk, Steamboat, you know, and further back, you know, there'll be other guys. But I mean, with the current wrestlers, I mean, he's always, you know, his name's always mentioned in that top group.
Well, you know, I think that's because there's a lot of fans that think he was a great wrestler. But I mean, he couldn't put his shoelace through the eye of his boots, or you know, or Curt Hennings, or, you know, Curt was such a great guy to work with. You know, there's so much that goes into a wrestling match that maybe some people don't necessarily understand. Little wrestling's a little bit sometimes like figure skating, you know, in the sense that if at the end of the match you wish the fans could hold up numbers and go 8, 9, 10, you know, or whatever, you know. And Rick was a really tricky guy to work with, in the sense that, you know, if he felt threatened, or, you know, he was very protective of his reputation, if that's what it was. But I can remember often going in with Rick and wrestling with him and being completely baffled at how he could screw everything up all the time and lose the momentum of the match and blow all the heat. Just when you had all the place was ready to come unglued, he'd call for a reverse backdrop, and, you know, like, he'd lose everything and start all over again. And I went through that so much. When I wrote about him, wrote about myself being really exasperated, I mean, I really did have a conversation with Vince McMahon for several weeks, where I was telling him that I swear he's trying to kill me off, like, every night. I know in Ottawa, I think I wrote that it was, you know, that Razor Ramon was in the dressing room in Boston when we had the hour-long match. I don't remember exactly where it was, and I maybe should have had my facts right when I said that. But the truth is, I was somewhere with Ric Flair. It might have been Ottawa. I know it was several times where I had problems with him, where it was just, I came back like, what are you doing? Like, how could you blow it so bad and so off the mark? Like, I had a match with him in Ottawa a few days after winning the belt, and the place was just going crazy. And I remember he had me in a figure 4, and he called for a small package, and I small packaged him, and he pinned himself. I made no comeback or anything. And I remember I came back, and I think that's where I dressed him down and said, I make comebacks. I make my comeback. I got a whole comeback I do, and if you can't do it, I'll do it on my own. And I remember I really chewed him out in the dressing room. And it got to be like, I started to really see such big holes in this guy's, his reputation was just, you know, for lack of a better word, was just bullshit. You know, he was just not that good of a wrestler. Either that, or he was doing all this kind of stuff on purpose, which makes him not a good wrestler either. I think I always took pride in going in there with someone that wasn't very good and making him look like $1 million. To me, that was a credit or a tribute to somebody that I liked or I respected. And Flair often worked with guys, and I remember the Hawk is one, and I can remember Lex Luger is another that came back after. And then we talked about him years later, and they said that he, you know, intentionally made them sort of look inept all the time, and always sort of implied that it was their fault. And I always sensed the same thing, that if Rick could sort of intentionally, like he did with me that one time, intentionally screw up the whole finish and make it look like it was my fault and kind of pretend to everyone it was my fault, it was his way of protecting his place. And I never thought he was a straight shooter in the ring at all. I thought he was always an old fox that did stuff that made it look like you know, and I think it was all intentional, or at least a lot of it was. And I remember I talked to Vince McMahon about it, and he came to the conclusion, and he said the opposite. He said that he thought Rick never did anything intentional, like that it wasn't screwing the matches up on purpose, that he just didn't know what he was doing, and he never did. And it was all sort of a myth about his sort of supposed greatness. But I do remember having some great matches with Rick, and, you know, I'll never take away from the fact that he worked really hard in the ring. He was one of the hardest workers in the ring. But I never thought he was a straight shooter, and I never thought he had an ounce of ring psychology.